Professor Narapat. Thank you, Indic Researchers Forum, for inviting me for the talk today. And I assure you, sir, I will overshoot my 20 minutes. Now, the subject given to me is Kashmir militancy from JKLF to TRF. That's about 35 years. To be compressed in 20 minutes is absolutely not possible, but I'll do my bit. Now, the contours of militancy in J&K in the last 35 years have gone ups and down like a sine curve. And there are a number of times when the hopes have been raised and hopes have been waned later. The origins of what's happening in J&K come up from Afghanistan, Pakistan, as has been brought out by Janasthana. There have been also relevance of political developments in Pakistan and policies and not so good policies of India and the state governments. There have been political initiatives taken by us in India, which have also caused ups and downs. So I'll chronologically sieve through the corresponding events on militant fronts and also on the political front, and relate to the effects that it has with the state. There will be factual issues and there will be some analytical issues as part of the thought process. Now, analysts have divided this period from 1988 till date to 3-4 different parts, but I would basically divide it into two. That is the period between 1988 to 2007, and then from 2008 till date. So I have taken a measure of 2007 as a key year that we need to remember. Now, the earliest phase of militancy on Kashmir emerged in late 1980s, but the politics of that era is important. The 1983 elections, J&K, if most of us recollect, were divisive in nature, but 1984 dismissal of Farooq Abdullah's government was actually uncalled for and caused large problems that happened subsequently. But 1987, the Muslim United Front had emerged and spoke about Islamic Kashmir separated from India, campaigned with Holy Quran in one hand and a Kashmiri flag in the other hand in the 1987 elections. Fueled by the outrage of the alleged rigging of the 1987 elections, a large number of Kashmiri youth exfiltrated across the line of control to join training camps in Pakistan administered POK. JKLF was one of the pioneers in this matter. First few outfits to recruit and train Kashmiri youth to fight against the Indian state. In July 1988, a series of demonstrations, strikes, and attacks took place in Kashmir and in Jammu region that actually gave the beginning of the Kashmir insurgency. It was obviously inspired by what's happening in Afghanistan front at that time, and of course a deep state created by Jan Ziaul Haq, who though had died at that time, but he was actually the creator of that issue. The writing was on the wall in 1989 when only 5% votes were polled in the general election held in J&K. Then to cap it, as has been rightly pointed out in the previous session, the Indian state's response to the kidnapping of Rubaiyat Saeed on 8th of December 1989, and by 15th of December, we had released Sheikh Hamid, Ghulam Nabi Bhatt, Noor Mohammad Rawal, Mohammad Altaf, and Javed Ahmed Zangar. Javed Ahmed Zangar's name comes up often, who were taken out in a ceremonial procession in Srinagar and dutifully crossed across to the Pakistan-occupied Kashmir later. Thereafter, Indian state got tough. We had Mr. Jagmohan posted as the governor, and there was a large gathering, lakhs people say, in Gawakadal on 20th January 1990, where mass firing took place. People have quoted hundreds and hundreds and thousands, but official figures are there about 110 odd people who died in that firing that took place. Of course, these figures are all debatable. Thereafter, in January 1990, the most difficult period of Indian history, when there was a mass exodus, 3 lakh Kashmiri Pandits left. Mr. Kaul sits here. Kashmiri Pandits left Kashmir and they moved downwards. Starting January, there were mass murders of Kashmiri Pandits carried out at that time, and we all remember that period so vehemently. Early 90s saw a full-blown insurgency. ISI by that time marginalized JKLF as it was a kind of pro-Azadi group in favor of Yusuf Shah of Hizbul Mujahideen, who was more pliable to the Pakistani cause. HM became a dominant group in 90s. JK government also tried its hand on a counter-terrorist group, which is also a matter of study for us. The Ikwanis, the Kukepare, and the Hilal Heather counter-terrorist group. They soon became target of the foreign terrorists, and in one 3-month period in 1996, about 56 Ikwanis were killed, and that literally decimated these counter-terrorist groups that were formed by the state to combat the militants. Now, in the 90s, as we are aware, the militancy was in full bloom. Kashmiri youth crossed across to LOC for training camps that were mushrooming in POK, other provinces, in NWFP, as it was called, and also in Rawalpindi. The process of joining the militancy was intense, with recruits traveling through rough terrain, jungles, heights, LOC for many days. Recruits will be inducted in programs and subjected to intensive training. Thereafter, they'll acquire weapons, and with the firing being carried out across on the borders, they will be facilitated to be returned back into Jammu and Kashmir. And then, of course, they were accompanied by Afghan Mujahideen and Mujahideen from other Pakistan Army, etc. They were battle-hardened, tough, and capable of carrying out several damaging attacks. In 90s, dozens of militant outfits had come out in J&K. Many of these groups, such as HM, JKLF, Al-Barq, Al-Jihad, Muslim Jabaz Force, many of these survived. Most of them got decimated and finished in no time, or amalgamated with other groups. Indigenous groups jostled from some space, leading to a brutal internecine conflict that was taking place between groups in the early 90s. HM, LHE, and JAT are the only groups that have survived in the 90s. HM is the only indigenous group left out, which was there right from beginning and is survived in this time. So two distinct subsets of militancy in 90s. We actually call the period of 94 to 96 as the era of the foreign terrorist, because the maximum time the foreign terrorists were being killed in India is that period up to 95, 96. So the foreign terrorists outfits such as JEM and Lashkar-e-Taiba came under this category. Most of the terrorists were citizens and criminals left from the jails in Pakistan and pushed across into own side, who have been recruited by these outfits. And most also came from Afghanistan. We found a fellow who was Chechnya, there were fellows from Libya, and they were Palestine, so came from all over the place. And then there are, of course, local militants, which include local Kashmiri youth, not in large numbers, who were recruited at that time. So consequent to these attacks being carried out and all things, the Indian armed forces woke up, and they created a counter-terrorist outfit, an excellent organization that has lived us for good stead, and that's called Rashtriya Rifles. It was specialist. It established a gridded pattern of combating the forces. It established a system for carrying out the road management and road survival against attacks and IEDs. So the Indian Armed Forces also transformed themselves to accept the kind, and we must thank late General B.C. Joshi for his initiative of creating the Rashtriya Rifles at that time. But there were attacks progressively increased. In 91, 92, there were 5,500 attacks on the security forces. But by 1996, they had dropped down to sub 100. So when the foreign terrorists came and the RR was raised, we were able to dominate this the whole cycle of operations, and things were better by that time. Of course, there was a hijacking of IC-427 in 93. There was siege of Hazratbal carried out thrice. In 1993 twice, and in March 1996. There was also a siege of Charare Sharif in December 94. Elections were held again in J&K in 96, and NC won the elections. On the political front, Nawaz Sharif came up, and we had Indra Kumar Gujral. There were good discussions that took place in Malé, and some kind of a composite dialogue process started at that time. So, there was a beginning on some political movement. Now, the Prime Minister Vajpayee's years are most important in the history of our nation, of Jammu and Kashmir. Now, Prime Minister Vajpayee made sincere efforts to bring about peace there, despite all the problems that happened during his time. The bus yatra to Lahore, though Musharraf was already preparing grounds for the Kargil war. Meanwhile, Musharraf took over in a coup. And this was followed by the hijacking of the Indian Airlines flight IC-814 to Kandahar. And Indian state, as often happened, somebody referred to the weakness of a state, released 3 hardcore terrorists: Masood Asar, who we hear even now, Umar Sheikh, whom we have heard of later, and Mushtaq Ahmed Zangar, which we have referred again earlier. So, this thing continued in this manner. 2000 and 2002 were very tough years for the militancy in J&K. Terrorist attack, when we say maximum terrorists killed in a year, we refer to 2001, 2002. Those are years. 2000 terrorists were killed in 1 year. So you can imagine the way the things had gone up after the Kargil war and after the parliamentary attack. Those are tough years for these forces there. So the parliamentary attack, which was referred earlier, also led to a 10-month border standoff, followed by Agra summit between President Musharraf and Prime Minister Vajpayee. It had a lot of hope, but it did not succeed. And then they were interlocutor KC Pant's efforts, and most importantly, the effort of Deputy Prime Minister M.K. Advani, in which he started discussions with Hurriyat on the prodding of Prime Minister Vajpayee, and 2-3 meetings were held. But unfortunately, the government lost in the election in 2004, and it moved away. It's important to mention about some personalities in this manner. Muhammad Yusuf Shah, commonly known as Sayyid Salahuddin, is the head of Hizbul Mujahideen. In 87, he contested election. He was a cleric. He had a mass following of youth. He had firebrand speeches in the Jama Masjid. So he he was a candidate for Muslim United Front, and rightly so. People said he should have won in the Srinagar's Amira Kadal constituency, but he lost. Consensus is that the election was stolen from him and given to a national conference candidate. He today heads the United Jihad Council, which is a Pakistan-based conglomeration of 13 jihadist militarist groups sponsored by the ISI. Of this, of course, 3-4 are only influential types, and others are just also ran. Lashkar-e-Taiba, Hizbul Mujahideen, Harkat-e-Mujahideen, Al-Badr are the important ones. Lashkar-e-Taiba is important to be mentioned because they are called the army of the good, or the army of the pure, as they call themselves, founded by Hafiz Saeed, whom we know. He's a Pakistani, and this organization was created by the funding they got from Osama bin Laden. Hafiz Mohammed Saeed is a Pakistani wanted terrorist, co-founder of Lashkar-e-Taiba, and also chief of Jamaatul Dawa, mainly operating for Pakistan. Hafiz Saeed is currently serving 11-year prison sentence. God alone is where mostly he keeps giving speeches outside. Until 2008, the situation remained stable and the number of local militants killed in encounters had got lower and lower. Muhammad Masood Azhar Alvi is a radical Islamist whom we call Masood Azhar, and terrorist, being the founder of Pakistan-based terrorist organization called Jaish-e-Mohammed, active mainly in POK. 1st May 2019, Masood Azhar was also designated as an international terrorist by Security Council. I must mention the All-Party Hurriyat Conference. It was formed in 9th of March 93, the alliance of 26 political, social and religious organizations as a united political front. Meanwhile, Umar Farooq, with their base in Jama Masjid in downtown Srinagar, took over, which is a hotbed of actually pro-Pakistani sentiment. He was the first chairman of this organization. Other founding leaders were Sayyid Shah Gilani, who later became chairman, Abdul Ghani Bhatt, Maulvi Abbas Ansari, and Professor Muhammad Abdul Ghani Bhatt. So the APHC was later on split between two parts in 2002. The Pakistani blame our intelligence agency of doing so between Mir Wais faction and Gilani faction. But 2014, ISI again pushed them to join together, and they became a same organization. Now, coming back to the chronology of events, we were back in the first decade of this century. The most significant pattern of militancy started in early 2000 when local Kashmiri became disenchanted with the idea of militancy. This is a significant change that we saw in the beginning of this century. The popular sentiment meant that they started fearing democratic means of resolving Kashmir conflict. In 2002, J&K saw very fine elections being carried out, most successful one in history. The fence which was erected thereafter made a lot of difference, substantial change in denying infiltration. It has been opined by many thinkers that by that time, 2007, there was a general climate that there is something hopeful around in Kashmir happening. So the period between 2003 in Vajpayee years and it came across to up to 2007, there was intense amount of hope that things are changing and changing for the good. And this, of course, is because of the importance of the fence, and that teenagers who were born after 98 when things started got fed up with the violence that they've seen in their teenage and growing up years. So 2007 militancy was its lowest ebb. Situation was normal. There were only 4 pockets in the news at that time in 2007: Lulab, Shopia, Taral, and Kokarnag. But the official narrative of Indian and the state government continued as if it's routine. There is a whole lot of fighting going on there. So narrative continued. The new generation of the Kashmiri youth came of age. They were deeply cynical of the elders, saw militancy as futile, saw film world, saw software industry as the future passion. But they were fearless. They would challenge authority. They would challenge a policeman stopping a fellow on the roadside. Why are you going here? He would challenge this. Why are you asking me? So things were changing in that time. So there was that. But we remained oblivious to this change. For us, the insurgency had not waned. We considered 2008 as a continuation of 2007, which actually was not true. We lost these years, 2005, and I would say I would blame the security forces as much as I blame anybody else. 2005 and 2007, we did not understand what was happening on the ground. To this, I come to the second phase of situation in J&K, the age after 2008. The range of 2008, 2010, 2016 can be ascribed hence in as an ability to perceive, not able to see the nuances of changes and aspirations of the Kashmiri society. 2008 onwards is an era which we feel is the era where radicalization started in a large manner. There were Maulvis who were pushed in from Bihar, Maulvis pushed in from Uttar Pradesh, who couldn't speak Kashmiri, but they were on the pulpit and talking different language by 2010. So I said 2008 was a turning point. Government of India and Government of Kashmir, for some wise reasons, agreed to transfer 99 acres of forest land of Sri Amarnath Ji Shrine Board in the month of May, and that caused intense controversy, and there was a blockade. Like we talk about a blockade with Nepal, there was a blockade which was carried out in Nagrota and in that area, and convoys are not allowed to move up to J&K. So that 61 days was a tough period in the history of Kashmir Valley. The demonstrations being carried out, they said at one demonstration there were 5 lakh demonstration in Srinagar, and then there was of course firing being carried out. Finally, the government had to relent, withdraw the legislation, and bring about peace because of that thing. So 2010 was a series of protests. This was carried out because the army was purportedly killed 3 innocents, Pakistani infiltrators, which were later on turned out to be not infiltrators, and they were local civilians, for which a CO and many others were punished and court-martialed. But the protest was launched by Mirwais and by Shahid Saq Gilani, which called for complete demilitarization of J&K. The mob started pelting stones, and the brickbat started. I will just take 3-4 minutes more, sir. And there were rubber bullets used, etc., etc. No, infiltration, exfiltration, not possible. Recruitment became much lower in these areas, and these times new militancy was localized. Recruitment process was easier in locals, but then there was also the issue of foreign elements of groups. So they were rudimentary training. That's why when he had a fight with Burhan Wani in 2015, it lasted only 15 minutes because the people were being recruited, but they were low quality fighters. By 2015, Wani released a video calling for young Kashmiris to join jihad. He had been designated at one time by Indian sources to be a top recruiter because of his media-savvy attitude. And so we did a demographic profile of the terrorists being killed in the course of last 3-4 years, and it comes out that 43% were local youth recruited by LET and JEM. 45% joined HM. So the studies have shown that the new recruits are predominantly for only 4 districts, which is Pulwama, Shopian, Kulgam, and Anantnag. They operate within 10 to 20 kilometers from the areas that they belong to. They are not venturing out left, right, and center because they have the warmth of their own population when they get it. And social media, I must add, has come out to be a very most effective weapon of the new militancy. Militants no longer require coercive means of the press to support them. Thousands and thousands of pictures every day or every month are being put across on social media sites. New content is published on Telegram and WhatsApp, encrypted site, dying declarations of militants, funerals being carried out, videos of training of these people being done. And so social media is not a tool of communication for the people. There it became a weapon of war. And number of times it was trapped into, militants were trapped. For example, in 2018, LET commander Naveed Jat, who ran away from a prison in Srinagar with the help of HM. Later on, a video came out. He was walking around in Anantnag Road as if he was inspecting his deployment out there. This is all motivating people to join more and more. So that was a changeover which happened earlier. The pelting of mobs, we have heard what General Bipin Rawat has been saying. Pelting of mob was only cordon breaking technique. It became a terminology being used among militants, cordon breaking technique. So-and-so militant is an expert in cordon breaking techniques. That's the kind of language being used across there. Now, before I end, a short one about the terrorist front, which I've been told the TRF started, it became his life on 12th of October 19 in Srinagar, Lal Chowk, and carried out in responsibility of an action being carried out. Portrayed a kind of new indigenous type of resistance. The outfit is now threatening. The game has just begun and it will strike. It is just a way of LET to show that there is a local face and it's a resistance and it's not a militant group. The language is being used is different. It's not Arabic. It's more secular in nature. It is just their way of getting out of FATF, etc., to say it's now localized resistance and we are not involved into this one. So that's TRF. My last issue here. More than 2 years after the abrogation of Article 370, Kashmir is visiting a relatively peaceful period. We who have been students and we watch every action and we see where it is taking place, we correlate actions being carried out. Data on the militancy and counter-militancy, if you follow SATF and other sites, depict that the new Kashmir sees a lull in violence. Every indice of terrorism today, including net infiltration attempts on the border, grenade attacks, suicide bombing, stone pelting, strikes, all have come down, except the IEDs have shown a little marginal improvement. So there is a change happening in last 2-3 years as we come to 2022. Once again, it is our opinion, many of our studies, that the situation is right today, 2022, to use right initiatives. This is the time to do initiatives to address the psyche of the Kashmiri population. It's not a question of employment, development. Those words don't matter. HR indices wise, J&K is much better than most states. We have to address the psyche of the population. And I'll end by asking myself 4 questions. 1, if 1953 Sheikh Abdullah was not put in jail, what would have happened? 2nd, if in 1984 Farooq Abdullah's government was not dismissed for no reason, what would have happened? MUF wouldn't have come up, 1987 elections wouldn't have happened, things would have been different. 3rd, if Prime Minister Vajpayee was not defeated in 2004, I think it would have, my personal opinion, it would have made a change. Of course, that's all history. 4th one, if we had read the signs of 2004 and 2007 again, rightly, maybe things would have been different. And I lift my 5th question. I am now in 2030. And this is a question which Professor Madhav Nalpat will ask me in 2030, sitting in the same forum, which he says, why didn't you read the eventology of 2002 and 2022 well, that we have come to 2030? So we must not allow to not read what mistakes we have done in 2004 and 2007 must not be done in 2022. And I rest my case, sir.